Astral Projection, a lecture by Dr. Douglas Baker. The astral world interpenetrates our physical earth. It is made of emotional material and extends for many miles beyond the earth's surface. In this lecture, Dr. Baker discusses the nature of this astral world and the astral body possessed by each of us. He shows, with the help of examples, that we all have the capacity to achieve the stages that lead to the conscious projection of the astral body into this astral world.
In learning the techniques of astral projection, we do ourselves certain favors. The first is that by learning the techniques, we help to eliminate the unreality of the astral world. We help to understand the nature of that world, and we learn to discriminate the real from the unreal. We must make it quite clear, though, at the outset, that astral projection is never a soul's purpose. It is a tiny little step on the path of unfoldment. It's a very important step, and one which must be, as it were, mastered. Otherwise, you have to keep coming back to deal with that aspect of your endeavors. But please don't go away with the impression that you should give your life to projecting yourselves astrally. It is a tiny little feature of discipleship. It is one feature of discipleship in which you can render mammoth heroic services to mankind, hence the need for these talks here today. We live, of course, at a time when increasing numbers of people are having out-of-body experiences. And no sort of discussion with their psychiatrists will make them believe anything else, that they have had an out-of-body experience. It has not been a vivid dream. It was out-of-body. The experience is so absolutely characteristic that there is no question in your mind about whether it was a dream or not. It was as if you suddenly went next door into a room, touched things, looked at things, smelt, felt, did everything that you wanted to there, and came back into this room. Now, that experience is so absolutely vivid that you have to come out of it and say, I don't care what anybody else says, I know I was out of body then. I had left my physical body behind and was living in a world that was as real to me there as this world is real to me here and now awake. And of course, some individuals have out-of-body experience as a result of trauma, some dramatic experience, perhaps through drug taking, perhaps through an accident in the street, and their experience is as vivid as anybody's. Anybody that takes away from you some capacity is doing you an ill service. To go to mediums to contact the hidden world is completely and utterly unnecessary, except where there are really difficult factors involved. No one denies that mediums have, in past ages, rendered sterling services. I know of instances where they have prevented suicide through their communications, but those are exceptions, exceptional circumstances. If you have to resort to another, and to another, and to another, and to another, in order to support, to fill in the gaps in your own equipment, how on earth will you develop? You must do the work. You can put it off from this life, but you should understand that you are putting it off. And you have obtained a suitable incarnation, bringing you to festivals, circulating you amongst spiritual people, to enable you to unfold. And why do we want you to unfold and not take up a couple of crutches through mediumship, resorting to mediumship elsewhere? Because we want you to be of service to mankind, to be equipped. Think about these things very, very carefully. Sometimes we do need a crutch, but it is much, much better to soldier on your own, to learn, to manage on your own resources, to develop them. Take that away with you. So, we enter a new age, and science is forcing out-of-body experiences on man. We are having many examples of individuals who die on the operating table, who die a clinical death, as we call it. A nice way of saying that the heart has stopped beating for some time. And whilst it had stopped, they have had out-of-body experience. And of course, you don't have to be spiritual to have your heart stop for 8 minutes. And many famous individuals have had just this experience. Carl Jung himself, the great psychologist. His heart stopped for a period, he suffered clinical death, and during the period in which he was being resuscitated, he left his body and gave testimony to the world as to the nature of that experience. Talked about glorious inner effulgencies of going through the heavens and approaching loved ones that he had not seen for years, and then suddenly, and this is important, and I don't say anything in this seminar that is not of importance, relevance. Suddenly he felt a blow on the side of his chest, which meant that an adrenaline needle was being thrust through the ribs into the heart muscle, and he was brought back to life, back to the clinic room where the operation was going on. The heart began to function again, and he was pulled out of his out-of-body experience. Psychiatrists, many people have given testimony to this. Peter Sellers, the famous actor, suffered clinical death, and my friend, the Queen's cousin, Lord Elphinston, had the same experience, and so on. So, science itself is forcing the experience upon us, and every one of us, sometime or the other in this life, will have an out-of-body experience. All we're saying here is that out-of-body experience is a fact of life. Every one of you has an out-of-body experience every night. Hardly any of you are aware of the fact that you have had that experience. And so we come to this exceedingly difficult subject. And right at the outset, we have to define, say, what an out-of-body experience is. First of all, let's talk about the bodies. We're not talking about the etheric body that surround, as Eileen Garrett describes it, the etheric body of vitality which interpenetrates the physical. This body belongs to the physical. If any part of it is drawn away from the physical for very long, the physical tissue will become subjected to invasion by bacteria, will begin to deteriorate. The etheric body belongs with the physical. Occasionally, rarely, in extraordinary individuals with clairvoyant capacities, it is possible to push the etheric body out of alignment and to use esolepsy, the accentuation of the senses, to perceive etheric entities. Devas of various kingdoms can be perceived in these conditions. Many individuals today, for reasons that I cannot dwell on here, are having these etheric experiences. I no longer believe in flying saucers. I have supported this contention for a long time, but now understand more clearly what these UFO sightings are. And one of the reasons for them being sighted is that individuals are becoming etherically conscious, are able to withdraw themselves into the etheric body unimpeded by gross gas, liquid, and solid tissues, and are able to see etheric beings, lords of mountains, devas of forests, who glisten and shine and rotate and flash out varying colors, very similar to those objects which we call unidentified flying objects. That is a matter for different discourse. We're talking here about the etheric body. And the etheric body has, as we have just seen, its own sensory equipment. It possesses, as you all know, its particular chakras. The chakras lie in certain regions which are a matter of attention for the yogi. The etheric body actually is the feeling body of man in the sense only of his being able to see, to touch, to hear, and to taste. Gas, liquid, and solid cannot feel. Nerve cords do not feel. It is the etheric part of the nerve cords, the ionic part, the flow of electrons, which actually feels physically. You should always remember that. Gas, liquid, and solid is a stubborn tissue which cannot feel. You feel with the etheric part of your physical body. And so there are, as we know, these physical organs, the eyes, ears, and so on, related to sensation. But we are talking about the astral body. And the astral body is slightly larger than the physico-etheric. It interpenetrates it. And the astral body is a very different kettle of fish, a very different proposition altogether. It is a physiological unit. It can very easily be detached from the physico-etheric. It can be projected 1 feet, 100 feet, 1,000 miles, 200,000 miles, without any deleterious effect being obtained in the physico-etheric body. So that's the first thing to understand, that the astral body can be detached, indeed is detached, whenever we go to sleep. The natural position for the astral body is about 2 inches above the physical body in the sleep condition. In the sleep condition. Anybody conscious while he is asleep is in the first stage of astral projection. Anybody conscious while he is asleep is out of body. He is in his astral body. And so the astral body can be detached, and my subject today is the science of projecting the astral body. The secondly important thing about the astral body to remember here is this. It has its own sensory equipment. It has its own organs of vision, its own organs of hearing, and they are clairaudient capacities, clairvoyant capacities. In other words, it is possible for the body to hear, and it is possible for the astral body to hear something 1,000 miles away in a completely different setting. The 2 sets of sensory equipment may be quite separated from each other, and in highly advanced individuals, conscious mediums, they may function simultaneously as they do in me. This is the secret of my being able to pour out incessantly such vast quantities of teachings, that I am a conscious medium. And conscious mediumship is the target for all men and women in discipleship. And so if you do nothing this week at the festival, but go away with a clear idea as to the difference between conscious mediumship and unconscious mediumship, you will have gained much. We're beginning to get a picture now of an astral body which is an exact replica of the physico-etheric, though it is dependent on its integrity. Its integrity is dependent upon your emotional attitude. Your emotional attitude. If you are a person who is highly emotional, you can warp and twist the astral body. I have seen sexual perverts in the astral world with organs grafted onto them, emotional organs grafted onto them. The object of their desire has been so strongly attached to them that they are welded to them. That does not mean to say that that is a persistent process. That shape of the body can be altered by you. We tend, therefore, being human, to visualize ourselves always a little younger than we are, always a little less marred by the processes of age, and therefore our attitude to the astral, our effect on the astral body is to make it appear a little younger. Perhaps I'm being a bit harsh. The truth is that the astral body invariably appears, when we can view it ourselves or seen by others, younger than the physical body is. So now we have a clear picture of the astral body, and we should not ever get mixed up between the two. Before we go any further, let us clear up the matter of the silver cord. The silver cord. This is part of a thought form created by mankind, by teachers through the ages, that when we leave the body, we are attached to the physical body, that is, the astral body is attached to the physical by a silver cord. And that this silver cord, no matter where you project to in your astral body, still keeps you in link with your physical. Certainly there is a link. I, as a scientific person, have never seen a silver cord. I must admit that in my earliest days, 25 years ago, I had this concept, as many people have, and was afraid, mark the words that I'm using here, afraid means I had an emotional thing about it, that I could snap my silver cord by leaving my physical body, especially if somebody interrupted me whilst I was out of the body. I say that I've never seen a silver cord. Many say that it exists. I've never met anybody who has actually given me evidence of it. And I say, don't worry about that silver cord. If you see it, take out a pair of scissors and cut it, and you won't worry about it again. Symbolically, cut it. In other words, have nothing more to do with that proposition. It won't worry you again. There is a natural magnetic rapport between the emotional body and its home in the physical. However, that magnetic rapport may be greatly diminished by the instability of the personality. Nobody who is unstable should endeavor to practice any esoteric discipline. Never recommend that a person who is distraught should meditate. Recommend that he should put his life in order. Never impose the disciplines of discipleship on somebody who can barely hold his consciousness, barely hold his personalities in one unified entity. Don't do it. Don't play with astral projection if you are recovering from influenza, if you are suffering from avitaminosis, if you are debilitated. The disciplines involved are harsh. This is why I teach a special method of astral projection which is safe. Don't come crying to me if you do things which give you unpleasant experiences alien to what I have taught here today. I can only stand by the methods that I teach because I know they are safe. And so the silver cord is something worth remembering, but at the same time you should not regard it as being something to be feared, that it will be broken. What you really should remember is Don't fash with hurt feelings. That's an occult maxim. Don't fash with hurt feelings. In other words, don't play around with anything esoteric whilst your personality is in disarray. I don't mean that you can't sit and relax. Of course you can, and rest. That's what you should do. Revitalize yourselves before you do anything that involves esoteric discipline. Historic examples of astral projection, many of them. Certainly you would have read about many of them in your own lives in newspapers or heard accounts of them. I can only give you some brief ones in order to show you that they exist in the Bible. Of course, there are many, and the Jewish prophet Elisha was known to have this ability to project in full consciousness to anywhere he wished. And he was used by the Israelites to project himself into the bedchamber, the council chamber. This is where matters were held by Ben-Hadad, king of Syria. The old story all over again, isn't it? Israel and Syria at each other's throats. This incarnation and their last incarnation together. Of course, Israel is an entity. Of course, Egypt is an entity, and they are reincarnated again today, still fighting it out. Well, in those days, this prophet, Elisha, would project himself into the council chamber of the king of Syria and bring back information to the Israelites about military movements. And the Ben-Hadad accused his counselors of treason, and they said to him, "It is no good accusing us when the prophet Elisha can get into this bedchamber any time he wishes and listen to what we say." I can not always give ventilation to some of the things I do know. I do know that the technique of astral projection is being used today in order to obtain political knowledge and understanding, fortunately on behalf of the West. Many of the saints in Christian mysticism, of course, were concerned with astral projection. One particular saint was incarcerated in a jail, and Alfonso de Linori, imprisoned in a jail in Arezzo, about 200 miles north of Rome, and locked up for 4 or 5 days. He began to fast in jail, and during that period he projected himself to the bedside of the Pope, who was dying in Rome. At the end of his incarceration he was let free, and he announced that the Pope was dead and that he had been at his bedside. A few hours later, couriers coming from Rome announced indeed that the Pope had died and that this saint had been seen at his bedside. He had projected himself there. But the difference was, ladies and gentlemen, that he had been able to materialize himself where he had projected. Now that is a very, very rare phenomenon, and I don't want to mix it up with astral projection, not materialization, but let us deal with it quickly here. In certain circumstances, it is possible for an astral body, which we can't normally see unless we are psychic, an astral body to enter into a room, the target, to where that body has been projected, and there to materialize for a short period. The room would have to be in semi-darkness, because ectoplasm is rapidly broken up by light. Usually it is in an old house. Usually the house has to have a congregation, a group of people present, from whom ectoplasm can be drawn, or ectoplasm can be drawn from the walls of the house. And then it is possible for an astral body, or a hand, or a face, temporarily, to draw into itself ectoplasmic material for a short period, perhaps even to say something. Sometimes, as I have often seen, a larynx might materialize, something may be said and dematerialize and go. And so we are considering some examples of astral projection, some historic examples. The British House of Commons, of course, is the site, as you would expect in any ancient and historic building, for astral projection to be seen materialize. There are numerous historic examples in that venerable building alone. It is old. It has been the focus of the emotional attention of its nation again and again. And that sort of building is ideal for this condition to occur, where emotional focus of the nation is placed. And in this country, there would be very strong capacities for materialization, irrespective of whether a medium was present, perhaps in the town hall in Philadelphia. Later on, perhaps the White House when it's a little older, and other places of a similar esteem. The example I want to quote from the House of Commons in Britain, which is the equivalent of your House of Representatives, Sir Khan Rash. He was ill in bed some 100 miles away, known to be there, but his friends in the House of Commons, Sir Gilbert Parker and Sir Arthur Hayter, described that an event in which Rash, known to be ill to them, walked into the House of Commons. They waved to him, delighted to see him there because they thought he was ill. He didn't nod back as he usually did, walked to his place, his seat in the House of Commons, and was even seen to take part in an actual vote. Suddenly he disappeared. It was found that he had not left his bed at all, and the testimonies of several members of the Houses of Parliament was the only evidence to show that Rash had appeared in some form or the other in the British House of Commons. So these are the historic examples. We mustn't mix them up with materialization. Many examples of clairvoyance which must not be mixed up with astral projection. Of course, you can achieve clairvoyance by astral projection. But clairvoyance per se, the clairvoyance of Emanuel Swedenborg, is not astral projection. He could see a fire in Stockholm 200 miles away. He could describe the progress of the fire down the street to his friends around him. He could eventually say, the fire has halted. My own house has been saved. It is only 2 or 3 houses away from the fire, although the fire was going on 200 miles away. That was clairvoyance. Many of us learn through the disciplines of discipleship to develop clairvoyance. In my discussions on the dream life, the development of vrittis leads, though I may not say it exactly, to clairvoyance. And so we come to the subject of astral projection. And today I'm going to talk about the kinds of astral projection, and I'm going to divide the kinds of projection up into the distances to which you can project. And so if I talk about stage 1, I'm talking about the first stage of projection depicted here, where the body is slightly out of alignment with the physical. The astral body is slightly out of alignment with the physical. Then I'm going to talk about projection 10 feet, 100 yards, a great distance, and then further still. And so we come then to consider the first stage of astral projection, the first stage of astral projection. This is the natural position of the astral body in sleep. It is a condition of desperate necessity for good health. No drugs, no devices can give us the refreshing experience of natural sleep. And natural sleep requires out-of-body experience. The astral body has to be out of alignment with the physical in order for the cells to regenerate, the physical cells to regenerate. And so, this is what we mean by the first stage of projection. But it can occur in other conditions. Many people have insufficient glue, including all disciples. Glue, as it were. May I use the word glue? Adhesiveness between the bodies, so that it is very easy for them to slip into their mental body, which is what we train ourselves to do in discipleship. To leave the world behind, cast off the emotional attachments, and seat ourselves in the mental body as a stepping stone into the higher mental body. That is plain, straightforward meditation. We all learn to do it. And so, some of us are susceptible to conditions which force our astral bodies out of alignment whilst we are awake. Traveling in an aeroplane can do it very, very easily. This vibration of the plane can force the astral body out of alignment even whilst we are awake. This has an effect of exhausting us, paradoxically exhausting us. Some people can be in a plane only an hour and feel absolutely whacked by it. And they are individuals whose astral bodies detach very easily. I have had many astral experiences, out-of-body experiences in planes. And of course, the difficulty is, I don't mind out-of-body experiences, but the difficulty is when the body goes out of alignment to such an extent that it's outside the plane. And the moment that you go outside the plane in your astral body, there's the noise of the engines, terrible noise. And this is a characteristic of it, that the astral body, detached from the physical, outside the plane, while the plane is moving, picks up this tremendous noise, static, and feeds it through into the physical body. Well, most of us automatically learn to shut out the astral world, but when you are a disciple and you are learning to reach into those worlds, then it's not always easy to put the shutter off. And sometimes in a plane this can be disconcerting. Anesthesia can force the astral body out of alignment with the physical, as we well know. Sitting for development, that very dangerous process, sitting for development, can produce out-of-body experience. The difficulty is that individuals do this without the advice of mediums of long standing, if they must do it at all. And the difficulty is that doing it in full consciousness makes it a possibility that it will happen when they don't want it to happen. Sitting for development can be highly dangerous. It is not recommended in the school of wisdom that I represent. This can lead to possession quite easily. Deliberately making yourself negative, receptive to anything that can come through can lead to possession. And that possession can lead to habits forming in your life which are the habits of the one possessing, obviously. Nobody's going to possess you unless they want something from your situation. And if you are a person that has, for instance, access to alcohol, and there is an alcoholic, his recent suicidal attempt has been successful, he still has the desire for alcohol, and he will use anything that he can to get the taste of alcohol, and will possess it. Do be very, very careful about practicing the dangerous art of sitting for development. Extremely dangerous. Then, of course, there is the factor of trauma. Any blow can push your astral body out of alignment, and I'll deal with that in a moment. And finally, with regard to the other conditions other than sleep, which cause this first stage, there is the dangerous practice also of sitting, or rather sleeping, in broad sunlight, in strong sunlight. Many of us, of course, like to have a dip in the swimming, may I call it a swimming bath? I know you don't call it that. We go in for a swim, come out and lie in the hot sun and fall asleep. Highly dangerous. When you fall asleep, the astral body goes out of alignment with the physical, and the physico-etheric body is at the mercy of cosmic rays. And as a result of this, there can be damage to the etheric body to the extent of this working through to the physical. Damage to the neurons, the spinal cord, and heat stroke, sunstroke, and so on. Very, very dangerous to sleep in the hot midday sun. I think it was Kipling that said only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. I have on several occasions during astral projection in my earlier days found myself in the body of somebody lying on the edge of a swimming pool, looking out through his eyes into the world there with brilliant sunlight, the swimming pool, people running around and jumping in and so on. Just an aberration, certainly, granted, on my part, but it illustrates that it is very, very easy, whilst asleep in the hot sun, to have an out-of-body experience. And whilst that is no difficulty, the physical body is very vulnerable indeed. Now there is another condition, and this is the important one to remember, which produces out-of-body experience to this extent and full consciousness. And that is when we have been doing something repetitive during a day. Driving and driving and driving, 16 hours non-stop. Taking turns, going over rises and so on. But at the end of the day, we come home absolutely exhausted. Fling ourselves on the bed. We think, now we can sleep. That long, long journey. But the moment that you shut your eyes, you're doing that journey all over again. You're taking those bends and up the rises and down and so on and so on. The physical body goes to sleep. The physical body goes to sleep. But you are on this journey still. The brain has been going over it again and again, but it repeats it. And during that, you may suddenly, of course, go near the edge of the road and get a fright. And immediately, you jolt in your sleep. You weren't asleep, you'll say. You were. The physical body was asleep. But you were still alert. And you jolt back into the physical body. You were out of body. Now, I have given you there a very, very valuable hint for meditation. When you are composed for meditation and you actually visualize, your visualization here is enforced. You have been doing it all day long, and even when you put the physical body to sleep, you are seeing that roadway in front of you. You are visualizing it under force, and you have an out-of-body experience. If you can learn to visualize with the same intensity, you automatically leave the physical body, and from there you can take your consciousness to a higher level. But instead of visualizing the roadway ahead of you, you are visualizing a symbol. If it's an archetypal symbol like the ones I gave you yesterday, you can take that symbol higher and higher and higher into the Buddhic plane. And so, that is important to remember. That the moment that you visualize, you can have entry into the inner worlds. So here are some examples in which you obtain this condition. Later on, in the next session, I'm going to tell you how to do this consciously so that you can have a projection, and why we should want to have this stage of projection at all. The second stage of astral projection is when the astral body is projected only a short distance away. And this is the projection most remembered by the masses of people who have had out-of-body experience. Send around a questionnaire asking people, have you had an out-of-body experience? If so, where, how far? This will come back. People have fallen whilst crossing a road or stepping onto a pavement, slipped, and the jolt has projected them out of the body. And whilst the physical body was unconscious, they found themselves looking down at it. People tending their physical body. There's been an accident. Now,